The rain slammed against the taxi window, as if it carried a grudge from another lifetime. Each droplet slid down the glass and stretched the glow of the streetlights into long red streaks, like the unhealed wounds of a past that never stopped bleeding. I held my daughter tightly, little Sophie barely more than 3 months old, a child who had already grown too accustomed to hunger, to cold, and to the long silences of days without a place to belong. Her tiny breath warmed the fragile space between us, like a faint ember trying to pull me back from the fear tightening around my chest. I had not eaten since yesterday. My fingertips trembled as I gripped the empty bottle, praying she would not wake. The stale smell of old cigarettes clinging to the seats mixed with the artificial scent of pine and twisted my stomach. In my pocket I had only $5 left, and I knew I had hit the bottom. But the worst had not arrived yet. The worst was the place we were headed, the Ashford estate, where their family had hinted more than once that my daughter did not belong to them. The taxi lurched as it turned onto the long road leading to the massive iron gate. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his look hurried and annoyed. "End of the line, get out." His voice was blunt without a trace of pity. I nodded awkwardly, curling into myself, as if I could shrink into something invisible, then push the door open into the rain that was falling heavier by the moment. Water splashed across my face, cold enough to seep straight into my bones. I wrapped my arms more firmly around Sophie, shielding her head with the corner of the thin, worn blanket I carried. The taxi did not wait for me to close the door. The moment I stepped out with my bag dragging at my arm, the car sped away and vanished into the darkness, leaving me standing before the closed gate of a world of luxury I had never belonged to. Through the blurred curtain of rain, the Ashford mansion appeared, its warm yellow lights spilling from wide windows onto the courtyard, like illuminated pieces of a life completely different from the one I was holding in my arms. I heard my heartbeat pounding in the still, overly affluent silence. From the iron gate, a small camera shifted, scanning me from head to toe. I drew in a deep breath, fighting the urge to cry. I had called ahead. Noah knew I was coming. He knew Sophie was sick, knew I had no home left, knew I could not keep going alone. Even so, I was not sure he would open the gate for me. I stepped toward the intercom beside the gate, my cold, wet finger pressing the call button. A faint beep sounded, followed by a stretch of waiting that felt endless. Rain lashed against my neck, water soaking down my back. Sophie stirred, letting out a soft whimper. I rubbed her back gently, praying she stayed asleep. A woman's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp and openly displeased. "Who is it?" I swallowed hard, my lips trembling from the cold and the fear. "It is me, Emma Carter. I am here to see Noah." I heard a long, deliberate sigh, the kind that seemed designed to deliver contempt. Noah's mother, Margaret Ashford. Even separated by a gate and dozens of feet of stone pathway, I could feel the icy disdain in every word she spoke. "You arrived sooner than I expected." The gate opened slowly, the metal groaning beneath the pounding rain. I stepped inside, my shoes sinking into puddles, my arms tightening around Sophie, as if she could be snatched away at any moment. The stone path toward the main entrance was so long, it felt like I was being swallowed by a world too clean, too bright, too perfect to make room for someone like me. Each step echoed sharply, nothing to hide the contrast between my poverty and the pristine space before me. When the enormous door opened, Margaret stood there. Her gray hair was neatly pinned, her face emotionless, her eyes assessing me as though I were an intruder. Sophie began to cry softly. And in that moment, I felt something worse than the rain, the cold or the hunger tightening around my life. I was not welcome here. My daughter was not welcome here. And tonight, I would have to fight, in the only way a desperate mother knows, how to protect the child resting in her arms. Thank you for staying with us until this moment, and if the story of Emma and little Sophie has touched your heart, even just a little, please consider subscribing to our channel, clicking like and sharing, so that more people can listen to emotional journeys like this every day. Leave a comment, And tell me where you are watching from, which city and which country, so I can know how far this small story has traveled across the world. Your presence is the strength that encourages us to continue telling many more stories ahead. Margaret did not invite me inside, nor did she offer another word. She simply turned her back and left the door wide open, as if I were nothing more than a misplaced gust of wind unworthy of her attention. I stepped in my soaked shoes, making small, shameful squelching sounds against the polished marble floor, and Sophie continued to sleep soundly, her cheeks flushed from the cold wind, her head resting against my chest, her soft breath, the only thing keeping me steady in this place. I could not remember the last time I had entered a home this quiet, in a way that felt empty rather than peaceful. In the main hall, the chandelier lights cascaded down from the towering ceiling, refracting through hundreds of glittering crystals, each sparkle emphasizing the distance between this world and the one I had just stumbled out of from the rain. Every painting on the wall, every vase, every piece of furniture existed not only for use, but for display, a declaration of status. I did not belong here, I knew that, and Margaret never missed an opportunity to remind me. She stopped beside an intricately carved ebony table, turning to look at me from head to toe. My clothes were dripping, my hair plastered to my forehead, my dirty shoes leaving wet marks on the floor, and I felt every inch of my skin exposed beneath the scrutiny in her gaze. She did not need many words, just one short sentence, sharp as a blade. I thought you had enough self-respect not to bring this child here. I tightened my hold on Sophie and stayed silent, a storm of anger, shame, and fierce maternal instinct rising inside me. But I could not lose my temper. I was not allowed to. I needed help, and I knew I had stepped into a game where every advantage belonged to them. Margaret glanced toward the clock on the wall, her voice dry as dust. You were scheduled for 6 o'clock. It is now 6:15. I was stuck in traffic because of the heavy rain and… I stopped. The excuse sounded so cheap I could not bear to finish it. She turned away, still not offering me a seat, not even glancing at the trembling child in my arms. The tap of her heels echoed along the stone floor, and then I heard other footsteps approaching from down the hallway. And then he appeared. Noah. The man I had once loved with all the naive, reckless devotion of a 25-year-old girl. Still the same face, his hair neatly styled, his shirt pressed perfectly, and his eyes refusing to meet mine. Perhaps I had hoped for something, a flicker of discomfort, a moment of remorse, even a spark of sympathy at the sight of me like this. But all I saw was unease, as if I were a parcel returned at an inconvenient time. Emma. He spoke my name like an obligation to be completed, not like someone calling out to the woman who once shared foolish summer night dreams with him on the balcony of my tiny apartment. I nodded, trying to steady myself, though my throat tightened painfully. Sophie stirred her soft sound, reminding me to stay focused. Thank you for letting me come. My voice sounded small even to myself. Noah glanced at his mother before looking back at me. My mother wants to speak with you in the study. He did not look at his daughter, not once. And in that instant I realized that even standing in the same space, the distance between us was greater than the rain-soaked courtyard beyond the gate. Margaret had returned, waiting beside the hallway. The study, Miss Carter. We will handle this matter in a civilized manner. I followed her, each step heavier than the last, not because my body was tired, but because I knew whatever waited behind that door could alter the rest of my life. And if I did not hold tightly to Sophie, they would take her from me without needing a drop of blood or the sound of a single bullet. All they needed were papers and coldness. Margaret Ashford's study was unlike any room I had ever entered, its walnut walls rising on all four sides like a silent, immovable fortress. The towering bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes arranged so perfectly they looked as if no one had ever dared to touch them. A large, dark desk sat in the center of the room, its polished surface reflecting the light like a still, undisturbed lake, and on it every object was placed with a cold precision, from the gold-trimmed fountain pen to the neatly stacked folder resting at the edge. I stood near the door, holding Sophie in my arms, trying to steady the frantic rhythm of my heartbeat. Margaret moved behind the desk and sat down with the unyielding air of a judge, about to deliver a sentence, while Noah positioned himself off to the side, not openly supporting his mother, but certainly not standing with me. A child needs stability. Her voice carried no emotion at all, as if she were reciting a financial report rather than speaking about a life. A child born out of wedlock without a stable home, without proper medical care, and with a mother who has no job, no financial resources, no direction for the future, that is not an environment fit for a child. I held Sophie tighter, feeling the chill sink deeper into me, despite the room being perfectly warm. "I am doing everything I can for her," I replied, my voice trembling yet determined. "What you can do is not enough. We have contacted the family attorney." She pushed a folder toward me. "If necessary, we will file for custody. With your current circumstances, the court will side with us." I did not take the folder. I did not need to open it to know exactly what lay inside. They had prepared. They always prepared. I did not come here to ask for money. I came to ask for a little support for Sophie Noah's daughter. She needs formula medicine and a warm place to sleep through the night. I did not think I was asking for too much. But to people like them, the existence of Sophie and me was a stain that needed to be removed. Noah still said nothing, staring at the floor, as if something on the marble was far more worthy of attention than the collapse of the woman who had once been his girlfriend, his lover, the mother of the child he had quietly abandoned. "You have two choices." Margaret continued, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk, each tap striking my nerves like a tiny hammer. "One, sign the document relinquishing all custody rights. We will take care of everything: housing, medical care, education, the future. The child will be raised in conditions worthy of the Ashford name. You will no longer be bothered. Or two, refuse, and we will take the matter to court. Believe me, you do not want that. Because when the court sees an unemployed mother with no home and no family support, the decision will be simple." My throat closed. I wanted to scream, to break everything in sight. But I knew I could never win by playing their game. They had money lawyers' influence. I had only two hands, a child, and a heart breaking one piece at a time. "I will not give up my daughter." The words burst out of me as if saying them loudly enough could make them unbreakable. I carried her in my body for 9 months, survived the birth almost alone, stayed awake night after night through fevers and coughs, and her cries without a single person to call for help. "No one has the right to take her from me." Margaret tilted her head, studying me as if I were a strange creature she had never seen before. "You have the right, Miss Carter. But you do not have the ability. And the court does not rule on emotion, it rules on capability. You have not been able to support yourself. You cannot care for a child. That is the truth, whether you accept it or not." The ground beneath me felt as if it were slowly sinking, the air in the room thick as mud. I looked at Noah, desperate for even the smallest sign, a nod, a word, anything to show he saw me, understood me, remembered the life we had shared. But he stood motionless, his gaze avoiding mine, as if I were an outdated responsibility he was trying to discard without smudging his image. "I understand now." My voice came out calm and cold, no longer shaking, but sharpened by clarity. "You do not want my child out of love. You want her for reputation, for control, and because you refuse to let the world say your son left behind a child no one cared for." Margaret did not deny it. She only gave a small smile, a smile as sharp as a freshly honed blade. "I do not concern myself with motives. I concern myself with outcomes. And the best outcome for the child is to be raised here. You merely gave birth to her. We will handle everything else." I clutched Sophie closer, feeling the small, steady heartbeat pressed against my chest. I did not know what I would do next. I knew only one thing. I had to leave this place, immediately. If I stayed, I would lose her forever. I did not wait for them to tell me to leave. I walked straight out of the study and down the impossibly long hallway, my wet shoes dragging across the stone floor, with a sound that felt as humiliating as the conversation I had just escaped. No one stopped me. No one in that house wanted me there, and I no longer had a single reason to stay another second. The great front door opened with a heavy groan, not the sound of metal, but the weight of shame pressing so hard against my chest, it felt as if something inside me were cracking apart. The rain had not stopped. It had grown even heavier as I rushed outside with Sophie in my arms, using my body to shield her from the merciless cold of the night. I walked quickly, almost running along the stone path that stretched from the mansion to the gate, the wind slapping my face until it stung my hair plastered to my skin like binding ropes, each step heavier as the rain soaked through my shoes, turning them icy and filthy. I heard Sophie whimper a small, fragile sound that reminded me I could not fall apart. I had to leave. I had to get her away from this place. But I had no car, the taxi had been gone for a long time, and I had only $5 in my pocket and a phone with a dead battery. The iron gate was still open, barely as if it had not yet closed after my arrival. I hurried toward it, feeling that if I did not cross that line right now, I would be trapped forever in that cold world, where everything was measured by reputation, money, and power instead of love. I stepped through the gate, my foot slipping on the slick stone, nearly falling, catching myself only through the survival instincts carved into me by months of struggling alone. I turned back one last time. The enormous house loomed in the rain, its window lights blurred and distant, as if the entire estate were silently watching me, judging me, and then turning away just like the people inside it. No one followed. No one called out. They truly wanted me gone, and they had succeeded. But the cost was not mine. It was Sophie's. They would never know how she smiled in her sleep, or how her tiny hand reached for me every time she woke in the middle of the night. They would never know the pain of a mother who could not afford a can of formula, or the helplessness of watching her baby burn with fever and being too afraid to go to the hospital because there was not enough money. I stumbled toward the empty road, the darkness and rain merging into a thick curtain with no visible exit. No cars passed, no shops were open. There was no one. Only me, my daughter, and a road stretching forward with no clear destination. I stopped beneath a tree along the roadside, trying to shield Sophie from the rain, the cold drops striking my forehead one after another, sinking deep into my bones. My hand shook as I opened my bag and took out the small towel already soaked through. Trying to wipe her face, my fingers numb and turning purple, almost unable to bend. I held Sophie closer, pressing her tiny body against my chest, trying to give her whatever remaining warmth I still had. A small broken sound escaped my throat before I could stop it. I did not know where I would go. I did not know how much longer I could hold on. But I knew one thing. Going back was impossible. That door had closed, and this time I no longer had a key to open it again. I lowered my head, resting my cheek against the top of Sophie's damp hair, whispering through trembling lips, "I am here. Whatever happens, I am here." But even I no longer knew how long that promise could remain true. I remained huddled beneath the freezing canopy of the tree, my entire body soaked through and shaking from the rain and from fear, while Sophie began to whimper, her hoarse little cries tearing straight through the night. I tried to soothe her, to keep her close in my trembling arms, but panic was beginning to claw its way up inside me. She was too cold, her lips turning a frightening shade of blue, and I had nothing left to offer her except the desperate prayers of someone who had run out of options. There was no one. Not a single silhouette, not a single car. I could not keep walking, and I could not stay. And then from somewhere beyond the darkness, the sound of an engine rose, the headlight slicing through the rain like a blade ripping open the night. My heart pounded hard. Part of me wanted to run toward the road and wave my arms, begging for help, while another part clung to caution, warning me to stay still, to be wary of hope. I held Sophie tighter, shielding her head with the soaked scarf. The vehicle approached, its headlights flooding the place where I sat, and a black SUV pulled up along the roadside, the engine continuing to hum as the passenger window lowered slowly. I held my breath, clutching my daughter with an instinct that told me to be ready for anything. A man sat behind the wheel, his face obscured by shadows, and only his low, rough voice cut through the rain. "What are you and the baby doing out here at this time of night?" His voice was not loud, but it carried a strange authority that made me falter. I did not know who he was. I did not know if I should answer. I'm just trying to get out of the rain," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The baby's weak cry trembled in my arms. The man said nothing more at first. He opened the door, stepped out, and shut it with a firm motion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark coat heavy and imposing in the storm, and he looked almost dangerous standing there in the dim light and driving rain. But when he leaned slightly towards Sophie, the look in his eyes startled me. It was not pity. It was not disdain like Margaret's. It was attention. Real, focused attention. "The baby is freezing. You cannot keep her out here." His voice softened, though it remained sharply grounded in reality. My throat tightened painfully. "I know, but I have nowhere else to go. And I do not know who you are. I cannot trust anyone right now." The man studied me briefly, then reached up and unwound the thick wool scarf from his neck, stepping closer to gently wrap it around Sophie. I instinctively pulled back a little, but he did not touch me, his hands moving only to secure warmth around the child. "My name is Gavin Rhodes, and I do not make a habit of leaving a woman holding a baby out in freezing rain in the middle of the night." The name meant nothing to me then, but his voice made something inside me waver. It sounded old in a way that had nothing to do with age carrying weight history, something worn and quiet and heavy. "You want to help me?" I asked, my voice thin with exhaustion and emotion. He nodded slowly. "At the very least, I want to make sure you and the baby do not freeze to death tonight. Get in the car." I hesitated, peering into the dark interior of the vehicle. I had never trusted easily, but right now, with his wool scarf warming Sophie, and with the absence of judgment in his eyes, I realized I had no other choice. I stepped forward, holding my daughter tightly, and climbed into the back seat. Gavin closed the door, returned to the driver's side, and started the engine. Warmth began to spread through the cabin of the car, and suddenly tears overflowed, not from fear, but from relief so sharp it nearly hurt. I did not know who Gavin Rhodes truly was, or why he was here at this exact moment. But somehow I knew he had not arrived by accident, and I was no longer entirely alone. Not tonight. Gavin did not ask me anything on the drive back to the Ashford estate. He only reached out to adjust the heater a little warmer when he noticed Sophie shivering softly, and the glow from the dashboard lights drew sharp angles across his calm but tense features, giving him the quiet volatility of a bomb wrapped in courtesy. I sat in the back seat holding Sophie, who had fallen asleep in my arms, and every so often my eyes drifted to the rearview mirror. Gavin never turned to look at me yet. Occasionally our eyes met in the reflection, not with curiosity or coldness, but with the focus of someone calculating something far larger than I could comprehend. When the car turned through the gates of the Ashford mansion for the second time, I held my breath. The exterior lights blinked on the cameras shifted, but this time there was no need to call. The gates opened at once, as if someone already knew he would arrive. Gavin parked in front of the grand entrance, turned off the engine, and stepped out. He opened the passenger door for me, neither rushing nor lingering, each movement controlled in a way that made it impossible to guess what might be passing through his mind. I stepped out on shaking legs, still weakened from the hours spent fighting against the rain, and the stillness of the estate felt almost blinding. Without waiting for me to speak, Gavin walked straight to the main door and rang the bell, its chime echoing across the wide corridor behind the dark wooden panels. In less than a minute, Margaret herself opened the door. Still immaculate, her expression tightening when she realized the man standing before her was not just me. Her gaze flicked to Sophie and me, then back to Gavin. "Who are you?" It was not a question born of curiosity, but a test. Gavin met her eyes without a single pause. Gavin Rhodes. I believe you have heard the name. Margaret faltered for the briefest moment. I could not tell what ran through her mind, but I saw the subtle tightening of her fingers around her cuff. Then, like someone who had faced far worse situations and survived, she recovered her composure. I know, but I do not recall arranging a meeting. You have one now. Gavin stepped inside without waiting for permission and turned back toward me. Come in, Emma. I followed him as though pulled by a gravity I could not fight. The air in the house seemed to thicken as the three of us walked into the living room. Only a few minutes passed before Noah appeared wearing a smoke-gray shirt. His tie loosened his expression, carrying that same familiar hesitance he had always used to avoid responsibility. Gavin remained standing, refusing the comfort of a seat, the posture of a man accustomed to setting terms rather than waiting for approval. I will speak plainly. She and the child did not return here to beg for pity. They do not need pity from anyone in this house. Margaret pressed her lips together, lifting her chin slightly. I do not believe you have the right to interfere in our family matters. I am not interfering. I am offering terms. Gavin withdrew a thick envelope from his coat and placed it on the glass table as if laying down the deciding move of a long-planned game. This contains the full amount needed to settle the outstanding loan the Ashford Company owes Highland Bank from 2 years ago, principal and interest, along with a personal financial guarantee. I can wire it within 2 hours. Margaret froze. She no longer sat, and her gaze sharpened, shifting like someone calculating political implications rather than discussing a family dispute. And the condition. She tried to finish, but Gavin spoke first. Your family will end all legal actions regarding custody. No interference, no contact, no threats. The child's name will not be forcibly changed, and Emma will retain full legal custody. Noah spoke for the first time, his voice rough and small. You have no right to force us into this. Gavin looked at him directly, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint, almost amused smile. I do not need a right. I have leverage, and you know that better than I do. I heard your construction company is under investigation for tax discrepancies linked to the Southwick Maintenance Fund. If this loan is not settled within 2 weeks, I imagine several newspapers will be eager to look deeper into the story. One phone call would be enough. The air in the room dropped to a temperature colder than the rain outside. Margaret said nothing. She was calculating, I could see it clearly. At last she tugged lightly at her sleeve and stared straight at me. Fine. But I want everything in writing, immediately. Gavin nodded. My people will send over the contract within 30 minutes. For now, they are leaving with me. No one stopped us when Gavin placed a steady hand on my back and guided me out of that house again. But this time I did not walk out alone, and I was not thrown out like a beggar. I walked out as someone who had reclaimed a piece of the dignity they once tried to bury. The car moved through the damp night streets as if gliding in silence, leaving only the wind and the frantic rhythm of my heartbeat filling the space around me. I could no longer remember the last time my hands had been dry, or when I had last sat somewhere warm without the cold pressing so hard against my thoughts that it threatened to shatter them. Sophie slept quietly in my arms, wrapped tightly in the scarf. Her cheeks flushed softly, as though she had finally been able to draw a full breath after so many long days wrapped in cold and uncertainty. Gavin said little, his gaze steady on the road, his hand resting on the wheel with a calm, solid control that neither frightened me nor completely put me at ease. He felt like someone made of many layers I did not yet dare to touch. The SUV turned into an underground entrance beneath a high-rise building on the west side of the city, and a dimly lit sign above us spelled out the building's name in metallic capital letters, Avalon Residences. The gate lifted automatically when the car approached, and Gavin guided it into a private lower level, stopping in front of a secluded elevator. He opened his door, retrieved a key from his coat pocket, then turned gently toward me. We are going straight to the top floor. My apartment is there. I nodded, unsure and overwhelmed, following without questions. When the elevator doors slid open, I was left speechless. The penthouse stretched out before me like a world I had never imagined stepping into. The air carried the faint scent of warm wood and a touch of mint refined and clean, in a way that made me feel as though even breathing in the wrong rhythm might disturb its balance. The ceiling rose high above, framed by wide panels of glass that overlooked the entire city. The distant glow of surrounding skyscrapers reflecting across white marble walls and polished oak floors that looked untouched by footsteps. I walked slowly, taking small, cautious steps, afraid that my presence alone might leave a mark where I did not belong. To the left was an open kitchen with a long, black granite island, low Italian pendant lights casting a soft glow over the surface, and a neat arrangement of appliances, a coffee machine, an oven, an induction cooktop, and other devices I could not even name. A few abstract paintings hung in brass frames on the walls, creating an atmosphere that was both modern and faintly classical. A large gray sofa shaped into an L faced a slender built-in television console, no wires, no clutter. Everything curated, quiet, intentional. I stood unmoving, feeling like a child wandering into a museum too afraid to touch anything. Gavin removed his coat and hung it by the door before turning back to me, his voice low and calm. "You may stay here as long as you need. Do not worry about money or time. There is a room for you and a room for Sophie as well. If you need anything, just tell me." I looked up at him, my mouth dry. I cannot repay you for this." Gavin tilted his head slightly, his eyes holding something distant, as though he was looking at a memory rather than at me. "I do not need repayment. I only need you and the baby to be safe. At least for now." My throat tightened and I held Sophie closer, feeling her small, steady breaths against my chest. The familiar weight of helplessness was still there, but for the first time in weeks I realized I was no longer alone in the fight to keep what remained of my life from falling apart. Gavin did not ask why I had been thrown out. He did not demand explanations. He simply opened the door and welcomed me into a place I had only dared to imagine in the half-conscious dreams that came during the loneliest nights in my leaking rental room. And perhaps for the first time in many long months I felt safe enough to take one deep breath and believe that tomorrow might not be worse than today. I did not know when I had drifted into sleep, only that the blurry image of the large windows, reflecting the soft, dreamlike glow of the city, still lingered faintly in my mind. When I opened my eyes, Sophie was still in my arms, wrapped snugly in a soft ash-gray blanket. The gentle scent of fresh soap and the unfamiliar warmth of clean sheets disoriented me for a moment, leaving me unable to remember where I was. Then the memories of the night before surged back: the Ashford mansion, the freezing rain, and Gavin. I sat up carefully and placed Sophie into the small cradle beside the bed, a white wooden cradle with delicate carved details. I could not tell whether it had been there all along or whether Gavin had arranged for someone to bring it up. The room remained quiet, the curtains drawn shut, allowing only a faint sliver of light to slip through. When I stepped outside, I was immediately met with the smell of bacon and coffee blending together, twisting my stomach with sudden hunger. Gavin was standing in the kitchen, his white shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his back turned toward me. On the stove, a small pot of soup simmered gently, steam rising to merge with the soft clatter of a wooden spoon stirring in a pan. Beside it sat a plate of golden fried eggs, a few slices of toasted bread, and 2 cups waiting for coffee. He noticed me in the reflection on the stainless hood, not turning around but speaking in a calm, even voice. "You are awake. Breakfast is almost ready." I stood still for a moment, unsure how to respond. No one had ever cooked for me like this, never in a kitchen so bright and prepared, as though everything was waiting for me to simply sit down. Especially not when the night before I had been nothing more than a drenched woman holding her baby, knocking on a stranger's door. Gavin finally turned his eyes, flicking over me before he gestured toward the dining table. "Sit. I have some fever reducer and electrolyte solution for the baby. You should eat something before you nurse her again." I walked toward the table in silence, feeling awkward in every movement. There was a first aid kit placed neatly beside the plates with bandages and antiseptic inside. Gavin pulled out a chair across from me and motioned with his hand. "Give me your hand." I shook my head instinctively, but he was not irritated. He simply continued in a steady tone. "You scraped yourself when you fell last night. I do not want the wound to get infected." I had planned to refuse, but the sharp sting that ran through my fingers when they brushed the edge of the table forced me to extend my hand. He disinfected the cuts with careful precision and covered each one with small adhesive bandages. His movements were firm and practiced, not overly gentle but steady in a way that told me he had done this many times before. I watched him, uncertainty nodding inside me. A man I had never met, who owed me nothing, had pulled me off a cold street, brought me into a luxurious home, cooked for me, bandaged my wounds, and asked for nothing, demanded nothing. No one was ever that kind without a reason. He did not ask about Noah or Margaret. He did not glance at Sophie with suspicion or pity. He simply cared quietly, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. But I knew too well that in the world I lived in, kindness never came free. I bit my lip, staring at the thin white strip of bandage wrapped around my finger. "What do you do for a living?" I asked, my voice low. Gavin lifted his eyes to mine, his tone even. "Many things. Investments, transportation, real estate, management, dry work. But I have done some things that were not clean." That last sentence made me go still. I could not tell whether he said it intentionally or whether it was its own kind of test. Gavin placed my hand gently back on the table. "But if you are waiting for a reason to be afraid of me, you do not need one. I will not harm you or your daughter, not as long as I am here." I tightened both hands together, uncertain whether what I felt was gratitude, caution, or fear. I was not used to kindness, even less to men who wanted nothing from me, and it was precisely that quiet, steady silence from Gavin that left me more unmoored than any of the threats the Ashfords had thrown at me. That night, after feeding Sophie and laying her down in the small cradle beside the window, I returned to the living room and saw Gavin sitting on the balcony, the faint light spilling out from the apartment casting a muted glow over his tall silhouette against the glittering city below. A gentle breeze ruffled his hair, but he did not seem to notice, his eyes fixed on some distant point far older and farther away than anything in front of him. I stepped out, hesitating, ready to turn back so I would not disturb him, but he heard the door open and turned his head. "You cannot sleep." His voice was low, touched with weariness but not cold. I shook my head and took the seat beside him, saying nothing. For several minutes we simply sat there, letting the distant traffic and the night wind fill the empty space between us. Then unexpectedly Gavin spoke slowly, as though each word was pulled from a memory he had buried deep inside. "I grew up in a slum on the south side of Chicago. My mother was a night shift janitor at a small hospital, working almost year-round. She had no education, no family, no help from anyone. It was just the two of us squeezed into a rotting rental apartment with mold on the walls and leaking pipes. Those winters were so cold, the water froze in the faucets. There were nights I woke up unable to breathe, my body numb from the cold, and she would wrap me in blankets, holding me through the night, so her body heat kept me from freezing to death. I turned to him, and for the first time since I met him, his voice no longer carried that composed steadiness, but a quiet pain threading through every word. He did not look at me, only continued. "She had heart problems from a young age, but no insurance. Whenever the pain hit, she would sit against the wall holding my hand, telling me not to cry, not to panic, just to stay beside her until it passed. I was 10 years old the first time I saw her collapse in the kitchen. I called for help, but they arrived too late. She did not survive. No medicine, no treatment. Just poverty. A woman forced to choose between paying rent and buying medication." I clasped my hands together, my throat tightening. Gavin leaned his head back and closed his eyes. After that day I swore no one I cared about would ever die because they could not afford to live. I did everything. Dishwashing, lifting cargo delivery work, and later, other things. Not entirely legal, but effective. I used that money to study, to invest, to build. I never asked for help because I understood better than anyone that no one helps without a price. He finally turned toward me, and for the first time, his gaze held something real, something unguarded. I am helping you not out of pity, not because of Sophie. I am helping you because I saw in your eyes something I once saw in my mother's. The desperation of a woman fighting to survive for her child, asking for nothing but a chance. I had no idea what to say. My heart tangled with emotion, gratitude and fear. Not fear of Gavin, but fear of myself, fear of softening. I was grateful he had saved me, but I also knew that people who carried loss and pain inside them bore wounds that never healed. And a part of me feared that if I let my heart stir for this man, I might lose more than I had ever lost before. Yet I did not walk away. I stayed there in silence beside the man who had once lost his mother to poverty, and who was now doing everything he could to save another mother from the same despair he knew too well. The first days living in Gavin's penthouse unfolded like a strange reality I needed time to believe was truly mine. Every morning, sunlight filtered through the wide glass panels and spilled across the pale wooden floor, drifting even onto Sophie's face as she slept soundly in the elegant cradle beside the bed. I slowly learned how to breathe evenly again whenever I woke, no longer jolting upright with the familiar fear of overdue bills or the sound of someone knocking to collect a debt. Gavin was not constantly present, yet his presence lingered everywhere in quiet, unobtrusive ways. Everything in the apartment remained orderly, as if someone always moved one step ahead of me, leaving behind just enough safety for me and my daughter to exist without flinching each time I walked into the kitchen. Some mornings I woke to find Sophie's formula already stocked in the refrigerator, the exact brand she was used to. On other days, a new pair of pajamas hung neatly on the door, smelling faintly of fresh fabric. I never asked, and Gavin never explained. He arrived when needed, and disappeared before I could grow accustomed to the comfort he created. Yet somehow I felt the weight of his unspoken care. I began to cook, partly because I needed to do something that reminded me I was not simply someone dependent on another's charity, and partly because the kitchen itself made me want to reach for every tool and ingredient within it. The first dinner I prepared was a simple chicken soup. Gavin walked in just as I finished setting the table. He sat down without a word, ate quietly, then placed his spoon down with a slight nod. It was praise in its own way. I could not remember the last time someone ate something I made without complaint or leaving halfway through. A week later, I checked my bank account, which had held barely 2 digits after I left the Ashford home. This time, the balance on the screen made my breath stop. $30,000. I stared at the numbers, stunned, a storm rising inside me. Gavin had said nothing. I walked into the living room where he sat working laptop, opened the lamplight, carving sharp lines along his face. Holding out my phone, I spoke in a dry, thin voice. "What is this?" Gavin did not look up. "An advance. You need it for essentials. Clothes formula for Sophie, health insurance, regular checkups. And for times when I am not here, I do not want your money." My voice rose more than I meant it to. "I am not, I know." This time he lifted his head, his eyes meeting mine, neither angry nor pitying. "If you think this is my way of controlling you, it is not. You can use it or not. But I will not let you or your daughter live in a situation where you have to beg for a can of formula again." I tightened my grip on the phone, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to slam it down to shout that I did not need anyone to save me. But another part, the part that was a mother, the part that had lived in fear for so many months, knew I could not move forward with empty hands. I turned away without another word, but that night, I used the money to buy Sophie's health insurance and to schedule her pediatric appointment for the following week. Guilt lingered like a shadow, but alongside it was a relief I could not deny. I still did not know who Gavin truly was beyond his quiet eyes and the name he carried. But I knew he had given me a place to begin again, even if I did not understand why. And sometimes that uncertainty frightened me more than the threats from the Ashfords ever had. Because kindness, when it comes without conditions, is always the kind people fear most. Yet I accepted it, not because I trusted him, but because I no longer had another choice. And because of Sophie. From now on, everything would be for her. I did not realize when the change began, only that the small quiet things of each day slowly wove themselves into invisible threads, pulling me closer to Gavin despite every wall of caution I had tried to build. One morning, I woke late after a sleepless night with Sophie stepped out of the bedroom and found her lying peacefully in Gavin's arms in the living room, her wide eyes gazing up at the ceiling as if enchanted by the way the light shimmered through the crystal chandelier. Gavin sat there with his back lightly resting against the sofa, one hand supporting Sophie's head and the other resting gently on her back, as though he had been doing this all his life. When I approached, he simply glanced at me and lifted a finger to his lips to keep me quiet, afraid she might wake. I stood there speechless, watching them as though I were witnessing something fragile and unreal. On another evening, while I was cleaning the kitchen after dinner, Gavin appeared from the hallway with a thick children's book in his hand. The cover stamped with cartoon animals, certainly not something he would ever choose for himself. He handed it to me, explaining that he had asked his assistant to order a few story collections for Sophie to listen to before bed. I laughed, bewildered, unable to hide my surprise. "You do know she is barely more than 3 months old, right?" I asked as I wiped my hands and looked at him like I was trying to decipher what was going on inside this man's mind. He simply nodded, his tone calm. "I know. But it is never too early to start. Babies remember sound long before anything else. A safe voice helps them sleep better." I had no idea where he read that, but later that night when I stepped out of the bathroom, I found Gavin lying on his side on the rug, reading each line aloud to Sophie in that steady, low voice of his, as though he genuinely believed she was listening. I stood in the doorway, clutching the towel around me, fighting back tears I did not want to fall. Another day, I found a small box in the kitchen, labeled in careful handwriting, "Snacks safe for breastfeeding moms." Inside were sugar-free biscuits, walnuts, protein bars, and several bags of herbal tea. I had never told Gavin I was allergic to peanuts. I had never mentioned that I struggled to produce enough milk. Yet somehow he knew. And he left everything quietly without a word. Gavin was not a loud man. He did not speak in sweet phrases. He had no flashy gestures or empty promises. But it was precisely that steady silence, that dependable presence I found myself leaning on day after day, that began to unsettle something inside me. I caught myself waiting for the sound of his footsteps every evening, noticing which shirt he wore, the faint trace of sandalwood trailing behind him when he passed by. One afternoon, while I was preparing Sophie's milk in the kitchen, Gavin walked past, paused for a moment, then gently placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch was warm, light, and certain. I turned ready to ask what he needed when he simply murmured one quiet sentence. "You are doing very well, Emma." I froze. No one had ever said that to me. Not when I carried my pregnancy alone. Not when I survived childbirth in an emergency room with only 2 nurses beside me. Not when I held my daughter through sleepless, shaking winter nights in New Jersey. And now a man who was practically a stranger, a man I had once feared might be a threat, had become the only person who saw what I had done and acknowledged it. I did not know whether it was kindness, empathy, or something deeper he refused to name. But I knew my heart was beginning to shift. And that terrified me as much as it moved me, because I was no longer certain I could survive another loss. Not again. Not after everything I had endured. On a foggy morning, just after I had finished feeding Sophie and was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, my old phone buzzed on the table with its familiar notification sound. I reached for it, expecting another promotional message or spam like always, but the moment I unlocked the screen, my heart tightened painfully. The sender's name glowed in pale blue on the display: Noah. His first message since nearly a month had passed since I left the Ashford home. After all the silence after that night, he watched me carry our daughter into the freezing rain. The message was only a few lines. "Emma, I am sorry. I was wrong. My mother was wrong. I miss Sophie. Can I see you for a moment? I just want to talk. I stared at the screen, my hands squeezing so hard my knuckles went white. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend it had never arrived, to believe that erasing it would allow me to continue living in the quiet, fragile safety that Sophie and I had just begun to build. But another part, the part that had once believed, once loved, once hoped for a real family for my child, kept me rooted in place, unable to ignore him. I typed slowly, carefully, each word pulled from a storm of memory and hurt. Why are you messaging me now? You left me and our daughter standing in the rain, remember? But before I could finish forming my anger into something coherent, another message arrived less than a minute later. I know, I did not protect you, but I cannot stop thinking about you and Sophie. Please let me see you both just once. Without my mother, no one else. Just me. As I stared at the screen, a whirlwind tearing through me, Gavin walked into the room. He stopped immediately when he saw my frozen expression. He did not ask anything at first. He simply stepped closer and glanced down at the phone before looking at me. I reacted as though I had been caught doing something wrong, snatching the phone up and turning my back. What did he say? Gavin's voice was not loud, but it cut sharply. Just that he wants to see me. My tongue felt dry, and an inexplicable embarrassment washed over me. Gavin was silent for a few seconds, then held out his hand. Let me see. I shook my head, hiding the phone behind me. I have not replied, and you have no right to control this. Something darkened in Gavin's gaze, not out of anger, but something deeper, firmer. I am not trying to control you. I know men like Noah. I know the way they come back, not to repair what they broke, but to break it again. I stood up abruptly, my voice rising under the pressure inside me. You do not know anything. You were not there when I was pregnant. You did not hear me crying in the middle of the night when Sophie had a fever. You were not there when I stood shaking in court, unsure whether they would take my daughter away. You do not get to tell me whether I should see her father. Gavin did not step back. He met my gaze fully, as though trying to see through the armor I was desperately pulling back around myself. I do not need to have been there to understand. But I am the one who pulled you out of that house, the one who put food on the table when you had nothing left, the one who wrapped your wounds when you could not. I did not do those things to stand by and watch you walk back to the man who pushed you into the darkest place of your life. My heart clenched so hard it almost hurt. I turned away, unable to bear the intensity in his eyes. I am not going back. I just want to know if he really regrets it. Gavin said nothing for a long moment, then he walked out of the room, closing the door behind him with a sound that was soft, but echoed like thunder inside me. The apartment felt suffocatingly quiet the entire afternoon. Sophie slept soundly in her room, but I could not do anything except pace from one corner to another, my heart a tangled mess of conflict and doubt. I did not reply to Noah. I did not message Gavin either. But when night fell and the balcony lights switched on, I saw Gavin sitting outside as he always did, leaning back on the chair with a glass of whiskey in his hand that he was not drinking. He did not look at me, and I did not know what within me made the tears fall so easily. Perhaps it was because I knew that from the moment that message arrived, everything had begun to shift, and I was no longer sure I had the strength to keep my heart safe one more time. I no longer remembered how long I had been sitting in the hallway outside the living room, only that the recessed ceiling light above me had slowly shifted to a deeper shade of gold, and every sound in the apartment had grown quieter with time. Gavin was still out on the balcony, his back against the chair, his silhouette stretched long beneath the light, spilling through the glass door. His hand wrapped around the same glass of whiskey he had not taken a single sip from since afternoon. I had told myself to walk away several times, to let things cool, to keep the distance I had been guarding so fiercely ever since stepping into this home. But something kept pulling me back, making me sit, making me look at him without being able to turn away. When I opened the door, he did not turn, but his voice rose as if he had been waiting for me. I know I went too far, but I will not apologize for wanting to protect you. I stood behind him, the breeze tugging at my hair, my heart unsteady with feelings I had never found the courage to name. Gavin set the glass down on the small table beside him, laced his fingers together in front of his chest, and continued speaking, his voice lower and more honest than I had ever heard it. I do not know how things began between you and Noah, and I have no right to interfere with your past. But the night I saw you standing in the rain, trembling while holding your daughter, I could not look away. Not because I pitied you, but because I saw in you something I had forgotten was real: courage, resilience, and a kind of unconditional love that made me feel small. I looked at him, feeling something tighten painfully inside my chest. Gavin inhaled deeply, and for the first time that evening turned toward me. I never thought there would come a day when I wanted someone to stay. I am used to people coming and going, but with you, I do not want that pattern to repeat. I want you here. Not because of Sophie, not because I feel responsible, but because I miss you when you are not in the kitchen in the morning. I wait for Sophie's laughter every night. I feel like this place is home when the two of you are here. I swallowed hard, my chest constricting as if someone were tightening a band around my ribs. His words were not poetic, not wrapped in bright promises or painted dreams. They were raw, simple truth, and perhaps that was why they felt more real than any sweet line I had ever heard. Yet I could not stop the turmoil inside me. I had once believed a man who said he loved me only for him to abandon me at my weakest. I had once believed a family would open their arms to their own flesh and blood only for them to reject my daughter. And now I stood before another man, also reaching out, also gentle, also making me feel safe. But was that enough to make me shed the armor I had built so painfully through the past months? I stepped forward and sat beside him, not touching him, but not distancing myself either. I looked out at the glowing cityscape, a place that once made me feel small and lost, yet now carried an unexpected warmth. Gavin, I whispered, I do not know what I can give you. I have nothing. I am a single mother, wounded, afraid to love, uncertain of tomorrow. He turned to me, his eyes steady and calm. I am not asking for anything. Just stay. Not forever. Just today. And tomorrow if you choose. My heart tightened slowly, like it had finally found a place to rest after weathering endless storms, a place where it could soften without breaking. But even in that moment, I knew that if I let my heart take one more step toward him, there would be no turning back. And that was what frightened me most. That morning, the air was still and heavy, the sky muted in a soft gray that seemed to press a thin, weighted veil over the city. I sat in the living room with Sophie sleeping peacefully against my chest, the remnants of the night before still echoing softly inside me, the words Gavin had spoken, words I never imagined I would hear from any man again, lingering like a fragile aftertaste. But when the doorbell rang, all those tender, uncertain feelings gave way to a wave of instinctive caution. I laid Sophie gently in her cradle and walked to the door, opening it to find a middle-aged man in a dark suit standing before me, a black leather briefcase in hand, and the unmistakable bearing of someone who lived his life in courtrooms. He introduced himself as Gavin's attorney and handed me a sealed envelope. Inside was a thick stack of documents stamped with a raised red seal. I sat down, scanning the bold print, and felt my heart stop. It was a full relinquishment of all parental and legal rights to Sophie, signed by Margaret Ashford and Noah Ashford. I went still, the kind of stillness that happens only when something inside you breaks open without making a sound. The attorney explained gently that after Gavin informed Margaret that every outstanding loan in her name would be made public unless she withdrew from the matter entirely, she had signed begrudgingly, but without resistance. Noah had fought it at first, but after a phone call that lasted less than 10 minutes with Gavin, he too agreed. No conditions, no requests for visitation, no promise to return someday, only signatures, final, absolute. I held the pen with trembling fingers, staring at the last empty line where my name was meant to go. For months, I had dreamed of this moment, the day I would no longer have to live in fear that someone could take my daughter from my arms. But now that the moment had arrived, it did not bring the triumphant joy I once imagined. It felt quiet, cold, like the final chord closing a long, painful symphony. Gavin walked into the room and sat beside me without a word. He did not push or persuade. He was simply there, steady and unmoving, a presence I could lean against, even if my world felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. I signed my name. Each stroke felt like slicing through a memory that had once kept me awake at night. Emma Carter. Now printed beside official lines declaring that Sophie belonged fully to me, no longer tied to the Ashford family, no longer a bargaining chip, no longer a shadow hanging over my every breath. The attorney gathered the papers, nodded his congratulations, and left. The room sank into a deep, quiet stillness. I sat frozen, the pen still in my hand, my gaze unfocused and stretched into the empty air ahead of me. Gavin placed a hand on my shoulder, warm and solid. Emma, you did it. You do not have to fight alone anymore. I turned toward him and felt the tears rise before I could stop them. They were not born from sadness, nor from joy exactly, but from the release of a weight that had pressed on my chest for far too long, falling away slowly, leaving behind an unfamiliar space inside me. I bowed my head and let the tears come without shame. And when Sophie stirred in her cradle, letting out a soft, drowsy coo, I knew that even though she could not understand it yet, from this day forward, she and I were truly free. No more fear of losing her, no more contemptuous stares or veiled threats, only a future not yet shaped, but one I finally had the right to draw with my own hands, with Sophie. And perhaps if I found the courage to trust again with Gavin too. That night, after Sophie had fallen into a deep sleep and the quiet darkness settled beyond the wide glass windows, I sat alone in the living room watching the faint shimmer of distant buildings flicker against the sky. The signed documents now rested inside a drawer, silent, as if they had never been the weight crushing my chest every time I thought of them. Yet that very silence unsettled me. When Gavin walked in carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa, I looked up at him, still shaken by how quickly and decisively everything had unfolded. He handed me a mug and sat down beside me, saying nothing, as though he knew I needed time to gather the scattered pieces of myself. The warmth from the cocoa seeped slowly through my fingers and into my chest, softening the knot of confusion that had wrapped around me since the moment I wrote my name. I turned toward Gavin, the golden light casting gentle shadows along the strong lines of his face, his eyes calm in a way that made my heart move. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely more than breath, "not just for the documents but for everything, for not leaving me behind." Gavin tilted his head, his gaze unwavering. "Emma, I do not know when it happened, but you became the most important part of my life. Maybe it was the moment I saw you standing in the rain, or the first time I heard Sophie laugh. But I know this now, I do not want to let you go." I set the mug down, my heart pounding as if it wanted to break free from my ribs. I had waited for words like these for so long, yet now that they had arrived, I found myself struggling to breathe. I was afraid, Gavin. Afraid that if I believed in someone again, I would lose everything again. Afraid that I would not be strong enough to stand if I were betrayed one more time. Gavin placed his hand gently over mine, not gripping, just resting there, a quiet warmth that sank into me. He did not make promises. He did not rush. But his eyes, his presence made me want to trust again. And when he leaned in and his lips brushed my forehead, then moved softly to my cheek, I did not pull away. I closed my eyes and let the moment guide me, let his mouth find mine with a tenderness that was steady, sincere, unhurried, yet full of meaning. The kiss was unlike anything I had known before. It was not simply the meeting of 2 bodies, but the fragile attempt of 2 broken souls, learning how to mend beside each other. I wrapped my arms around his neck without hesitation, without fear. In that moment, every defense, Every wound, every remnant of the past slipped quietly into the background, leaving space for something delicate yet powerful hope. When we finally drew apart, we remained silent for a long breath, as if trying to preserve every second of what had just happened. Gavin looked at me with eyes deep and warm. "You do not have to promise anything. Just do not disappear. Just give me the chance to stay beside you every day." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks without my noticing. For the first time in a very long time, I no longer felt like I had to fight alone. And perhaps it is only true love that allows someone to lay down their last piece of armor, to let themselves be vulnerable to trust, and to be loved. In that quiet night under the soft amber glow and the slow merging of our breaths, I knew I had stepped into a new chapter. No longer a mother running alone from her past, but a woman learning to love again, slowly, tenderly, and with courage. 3 days after our first kiss, the air inside the penthouse felt different, lighter, gentler, almost peaceful. I no longer counted the minutes Gavin was away, nor did I flinch when the phone rang in the middle of the night. I had begun to grow accustomed to his presence, woven into the simplest corners of our days, from the way he set a cup of tea beside me, when I read, to the quiet way his gaze followed Sophie, as if she were the center of the universe. But just as everything began to settle, a shadow from a world I had never understood came crashing into ours without warning. It was late afternoon, and I was carrying Sophie through the hallway of the building when a stranger approached. He wore a neatly pressed business suit, but the cold sharpness in his eyes betrayed something far darker. He stopped, glanced at Sophie, and lowered his voice. "Miss Emma Carter." The smile on his lips sent a chill crawling down my spine. "Mr. Rhodes owes my people a few things. It seems he is investing far too much in someone who offers him no return." Then he slipped a thick envelope into my hand, leaned close to my ear, and whispered, "Get the baby out of here while you still can. There are things money and affection cannot protect you from." I stood frozen, too stunned to react, and before I could speak, he walked away as if he had never been there at all. When Gavin returned home, I rushed to him, words stumbling out of me in a trembling panic. He went silent for a few seconds before calling someone, his voice dropping into a cold steel I had never heard from him. I had never seen Gavin like that. He told me to lock the door to open it for no one to stay inside. 15 minutes later, 2 large men in black arrived at the apartment. Gavin positioned them at the entrance, then turned back to me. "You and Sophie will be safe, I promise." But his face no longer held its usual calm. I looked into his eyes, my heart pounding, a raw, instinctive fear rising uncontrollably inside me. "Gavin, what is happening? What are you hiding from me?" He pulled his hands from his pockets and walked slowly toward me, trying to steady his voice. "There are people from my old world who are unhappy that I walked away, that I cut ties with work that was not clean. And it seems they want to use you to pressure me." I stepped back, as if Gavin himself had become a stranger I needed to guard against. "Who were you, Gavin? Why do I know nothing about the men who can threaten my child?" His head bowed, his voice dropping into something weighted and pained. "I never wanted to pull you into that part of my life. But when you came into it, my past did not disappear. I am trying to clean it up, but some things do not vanish as easily as signatures on legal papers." I held Sophie tightly, trembling, tears sliding down my cheeks. "I cannot let my daughter grow up in fear. I cannot sacrifice her safety just to be loved, Gavin. I once believed that escaping the Ashfords would be enough to protect us. I was wrong. If the world you come from is one that can swallow a defenseless infant whole, then I have to leave." Gavin grabbed my hand and held it tightly. "I will protect you both. I swear. You do not have to do anything, just stay." But I shook my head, each word tearing through my chest like a blade. "I do not want to live as if I am running. I have done that long enough. I want a normal life. And if I cannot have that beside you, then I have to choose another path." Gavin said nothing, only looked at me with the expression of someone who had known from the moment he fell in love that this day might come. But he still stepped aside when I walked into the bedroom holding Sophie close, my heart shattering as I realized I was doing the right thing, even though I was no longer sure I had the strength to survive a second goodbye. And this time, the man I was walking away from was not cruel like Noah. He was the only person who had ever truly stayed. I packed our belongings in silence, folding each tiny piece of Sophie's clothing, with hands that trembled uncontrollably beneath the weight of emotions threatening to burst through my ribs. The only sounds in the room were her soft breaths and the faint scrape of zippers brushing against each other. I did not dare look around, did not dare let my eyes linger on the framed photos Gavin had quietly hung during our first days here. And I certainly did not dare let my mind wander to the way he always appeared behind me at the exact moment I felt weakest. When I stepped out of the bedroom with Sophie in my arms and the bag slung over my shoulder, Gavin was already standing by the door as if he had known, as if he had been waiting for this moment. His gaze touched my face, then paused on Sophie, and when he finally spoke, his voice sounded torn open from somewhere deep inside his chest. "Do not go, Emma. Please." I tightened my grip on the strap of the bag and lifted my chin, forcing my voice to stay steady. I cannot raise my daughter surrounded by danger. I cannot live every day afraid someone is watching from the shadows. Gavin took a step closer, his hand halfway raised as though he wanted to touch me, but he stopped mid-air. "I am trying to clean everything up. I am fighting every day to pull myself out of the world that once held me by the throat. I have never left anyone behind, but if you walk out that door, I know I will never find what I lose again. You do not understand, Emma. You are the only thing in my life that makes me believe I can still be saved." I bit my lip, tears spilling faster than I could stop them falling onto Sophie's tiny sleeping face, unaware that her mother was standing in the middle of a decision with no gentle outcome. "Gavin, I do not know if this love can survive what may come. I am not as strong as you think. I am simply a mother trying to protect her child, even if it means breaking my own heart." He nodded slowly, pain darkening his eyes, but he did not step back. "Then let me be strong for you. Let me carry that weight not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because I love you. I have loved you since the moment you refused to bow your head, since you screamed through the rain for your child, since you walked through humiliation and still kept your spine straight. Emma, you are the only person I want to hold through the rest of my life." My knees weakened, as though every piece of armor I had built over these long months had cracked and fallen away. My heart pounded so fiercely that I had to hold Sophie tighter just to stay grounded. I once believed I loved Noah, once believed I would never trust another soul again. But standing here now before a man who not only saw me, but also saw the wounds I never spoke aloud, I realized Gavin had never walked away when I pushed him aside, never retreated when I lashed out, never stayed silent when I cried. He had been there each day, each night, each time I collapsed under the weight of fear, and now he stood before me begging me not to leave, not because he needed me to fill some void, but because I was the proof that he could change. I looked at him for a long time, then slowly set the bag down on the floor and took a deep breath. "Gavin, I do not know what tomorrow will look like. I cannot promise that the past will not follow us. But I know this: I do not want to walk away from the man who stayed even when I gave him no reason to." He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Sophie and me, holding us so tightly I thought I might shatter inside his breath. In that embrace, for the first time, I no longer heard the echoes of the past in my mind. I heard only his heartbeat, warm and earnest, steady as an unspoken vow. And I knew I had chosen right. Not because he was perfect, but because he was the only man who dared to love even the most imperfect parts of me. That morning, the sunlight slipped through the curtains in a gentle hush, as if the world itself was breathing easier after so many tense days. I woke to the sound of Sophie's soft, bubbling laughter coming from the next room, that rare, crystalline sound I had begun to treasure as a small gift life offered me after everything it had taken away. I walked quietly down the hallway, my heart tightening when I saw Gavin sitting cross-legged on the rug holding a stuffed bear and making ridiculous little noises that sent Sophie into fits of helpless giggles. Her tiny arms and legs flailed with delight, her bright eyes sparkling as she babbled in that innocent, wordless way only a joyful infant can. Gavin had no idea I was standing there. He was completely immersed in the moment in a small world I once believed he could never belong to. Gone was the icy edge. Gone was the hardened stare of a man who had walked through a past marked by blood and money. What remained was simply a man bending forward for growing infant, as though she were the center of the universe. When he finally noticed me, he did not rise immediately. He just looked up with a smile, the most unguarded smile I had ever seen on him, before turning back to Sophie with the same tender voice. "Your mom is awake, little one," Sophie cooed, as if she understood, leaning into his chest and grabbing his finger as though she had known that warmth forever. I moved closer, lowering myself beside them, stroking Sophie's hair as my gaze lingered on Gavin's face. I never thought I would see this. He tilted his head slightly. See what? A man who once terrified the entire Ashford family, lying on the floor making silly voices for a baby. He let out a soft laugh and brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "You did not think I could be a father. I did not know a man like you could be this gentle. I thought your world was something I could never step into. But now I am sitting here with you and our child, and I do not want to be anywhere else." Gavin fell silent for a moment, then spoke in a low voice, almost like a confession. "I used to think I would never have a family. I used to think happiness existed only across negotiation tables, something to be bought with power and strategy. But you and Sophie made me realize there are things in life you do not win, you simply reach out and feel them." I rested my head on his shoulder, my heart stilled by the truth in his words. There was nothing ornate in them, nothing dressed up to impress. And perhaps that was why they touched the deepest parts of me, the parts I had tried so hard to hide. As I watched Gavin lift Sophie into the air like a tiny airplane, her laughter echoing through the apartment, I understood something I had not felt in years. The emptiness was gone. The fear, the constant bracing for the next blow, the instinct to protect at all costs they had quieted. I was living for these moments, for my daughter's laughter, for the tenderness in the man beside me, for the peace I once believed was forever out of reach. And inside my heart, for the first time, a thought rose with startling clarity. Perhaps this was family. Not because of blood, not because of papers signed or promises declared, but because of love, and because someone had stayed long enough for the broken pieces to find their way back together. I reached for Gavin's hand and squeezed it gently, offering a vow I did not need words for. And he understood. He always understood. Dusk had just settled, and the last wash of sunset cast a warm golden hue across the western glass wall of the penthouse, filling the room with a soft amber glow. Sophie had fallen asleep after an afternoon at the nearby park, where she had laughed endlessly in Gavin's arms, her tiny body shaking with delight every time he lifted her toward the sky. I sat on the sofa, my fingers brushing over the blanket across my legs, my mind still spinning with emotions I hadn't yet found the right name for. Gavin stepped out of the bedroom, the top button of his shirt undone, 2 cups of hot tea in his hands. He handed one to me, sat beside me, and after a long, thoughtful silence, he finally spoke. "Emma, I need to tell you something." His voice was low and slow, not like the way he spoke when discussing business, or when trying to steady me with strong, certain promises. This time he was opening himself. There were things he once believed he would never change: the way he lived, the way he handled danger, the way he existed in a world where if you were not the hunter, you became the prey. But then you came bringing a gentleness I never knew I needed, and a small child who has turned everything inside me upside down. I do not want Sophie to grow up in the shadow of choices I used to think were right. I do not want you to feel afraid every time someone knocks on our door. I do not want my love to be the reason you must choose between safety and your heart. I turned toward him wordless. Gavin continued, his voice unsteady, even though his eyes held firm clarity. I have already begun clearing away the remnants of my past. The old business ties, the investments that would drag danger back to me. I am pulling out of all of it. It will take time, it will not be simple, but I will do it. For you, for the baby, and for myself. I want to live differently. Not because I am forced, but because I want to. I want to be worthy of you, not with money, but by becoming a better man. My heart pounded hard against my ribs. I had never expected Gavin to say those words, never imagined he would choose to step away from a path he had built with his entire life. But when I looked into his eyes, I knew he was not lying. This was not the cold, calculated Gavin Rhodes I first met, but a man learning how to love without letting that love wound the people he held close. I set my tea down and turned fully toward him, my gaze steady. Gavin, I do not need you to be perfect. I do not expect you to erase your past just to earn my forgiveness. But I need you to be honest with yourself. And today, you were. I do not know what our future will look like, but if you truly want to walk a new path, then I will walk it with you. Slowly, even uncertainly, I will still hold your hand. Not because you saved me, but because you showed me I deserve to be chosen, to be loved, and to be trusted. Gavin tightened his hold on my hand as though afraid everything would vanish if he let go. He nodded once, and without another word pulled me into his arms, holding me as if he were embracing the fragile hope just beginning to pulse inside him. I leaned into him, eyes half closed, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart beneath his shirt. For the first time, I was not thinking about what had been or what might come. I was thinking only of this moment, of the man trying to become part of our small family, not through promises, but through action. And I knew that if love was a choice, then tonight I had chosen him all over again. Night had fully settled, laying a deep velvet purple blanket across the sky outside the wide glass window, and in the distance the lights from the high-rise towers shimmered like thousands of quiet stars breathing within the heart of the city. The penthouse rested in a warm, gentle glow, not bright, but just enough to offer a sense of safety and peace. Gavin sat on the long seat beside the window, Sophie curled perfectly in his arms, her tiny face serene as if she had never known pain. I sat beside him with my head resting lightly on his shoulder, the three of us sharing the silence while gazing out at the world beyond the glass. No words were needed. The presence of the three of us together was enough to fill every empty space. There were dreams I once thought were impossible, and hopes I believed were too distant to ever touch. But in that moment, I realized that happiness does not come from perfection, but from imperfect people, choosing each other again and again. Gavin was no longer the cold man he had been in the beginning, but a man learning how to be a father, a partner, a companion, through the quiet sincerity of his own heart. Sophie was no longer just a child rejected by a powerful family, but a small, glowing light that had drawn two broken people toward one another. And I, a mother who once believed she would forever be alone in this enormous city, now sat between the two people who made me feel I truly belonged. Maybe tomorrow would still bring uncertainty, and maybe the past would return at times like a sudden cold wind, but this moment was real, warm, and complete. Gavin turned toward me, took my hand, and spoke in a voice as steady and warm as the breath he was placing into this new life we were building. He said he could not promise to be the best man, but he could promise never to give up, and that on whatever road lay ahead, as long as I wanted him beside me, he would never turn away. I did not answer with words, only tightened my hand around his in a quiet promise of my own. There was no need for grand declarations because true love does not depend on many words. It simply needs someone brave enough to stay when everything becomes hardest. The story of Emma Gavin and Little Sophie is not just a tender romance between wounded people, but a journey of forgiveness, hope, and belief in second chances. In this life, perhaps what we truly need is not someone perfect, but someone willing to walk through the darkness with us, holding our hand firmly and refusing to let go. And what about you? After hearing this story, did something stir within your heart? Have you ever stood between the choice of reason and emotion, between a past that haunts you and a future that feels uncertain? Leave a comment below and share your honest feelings so we can listen to the voice from deep within your heart. And if you love touching stories like this, do not forget to subscribe, like, and share so you will not miss the heartfelt journeys we bring each day. Thank you for walking alongside us through this entire chapter. May you have strength, tranquility, and may you always find moments of peace like this warm and gentle evening. Goodbye, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video.